Single dad, sold his father's war medals for formula. The pawn shop elder was a billionaire veteran who looked into the young father's eyes, slid the cash across the counter, and whispered a truth so powerful it would turn one desperate night into the miracle that changed both their lives forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The night pressed against the windows of Ryan Cooper's small apartment, heavy and dark like the weight in his chest. The steady hum of the refrigerator only emphasized the emptiness inside it. Grace's cries pierced the silence, each wail tearing at his heart as he paced the worn carpet, bouncing her gently in his arms. "Shh, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Daddy's here." He reached for the baby formula can on the counter, his stomach dropping as he shook it. The hollow rattle confirmed what he already knew, barely a spoonful left. Grace's tiny face was red with hunger, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ryan began to sing softly, the same lullaby his father had sung to him countless times during thunderstorms and nightmares. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby." His voice cracked on the second verse. The melody brought back memories of his father sitting on the edge of his bed, still in his work clothes, singing with such gentle patience. Now, that same tune felt like sandpaper in his throat as Grace continued to cry. Moving to the kitchen, Ryan pulled open drawers and checked old coffee cans where he kept spare change. A handful of pennies, 2 nickels, and a quarter, not even enough for a cup of coffee, let alone baby formula. He'd stretched every dollar from his last paycheck, but there was still a week until the next one. "Just hold on, Gracie," he murmured, though the words felt hollow. "We'll figure something out." The memory of Emily's funeral swept over him like a cold wave. The autumn day had been crisp and clear, mocking the darkness that had settled over his world. He remembered standing there, holding 2-month-old Grace, as they lowered Emily's casket into the ground. The weight of his daughter in his arms had been both an anchor and a promise. "I'll give her everything she needs," he'd whispered to Emily's headstone that day. "I'll raise her with honor, just like Dad raised me." Now, 2 years later, those words echoed back at him like an accusation. The apartment walls seemed to close in, amplifying Grace's hungry cries. Bills were stacked on the kitchen table, past due notices in red ink, a final warning from the electric company, and a rent reminder that made his hands shake. Ryan's eyes burned as he looked around the apartment. The few pieces of furniture were threadbare, but clean. He'd sold anything of value months ago: his watch, Emily's jewelry, except her wedding ring, even his old guitar. Everything, except. His gaze drifted to the shelf where a worn wooden box sat, its dark wood polished by years of careful handling. Inside were his father's World War II medals, awarded for valor under fire in the Pacific. They were his most precious possession, a testament to his father's courage and sacrifice. The box seemed to stare back at him, heavy with history and meaning. How many times had his father taken out those medals, not to brag, but to teach Ryan about duty, honor, and the price of freedom? They were more than medal and ribbon, they were his heritage, his connection to the father he'd lost too soon. Grace's cries grew more desperate, her tiny body shuddering against his chest. The sound cut through him like a knife, each sob a reminder of his failure to provide for her. He'd fought in Iraq, earned his own medals, but none of that mattered now. What good was honor if his daughter went hungry? Ryan's legs felt heavy as he approached the shelf. His hands trembled as he reached for the box, memories flooding back. His father's proud smile when Ryan enlisted, the last conversation they'd had before the heart attack took him, the promise to always protect what mattered most. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Grace's cries. The words tasted like defeat as he took down the wooden box, its familiar weight now a burden of guilt in his hands. The medals gleamed dully in the low light, each one representing a moment of extraordinary courage. The Bronze Star his father earned for saving his entire platoon. The Purple Heart from the wound he never fully recovered from. The campaign medals that told the story of a young man's sacrifice for his country. Grace hiccuped against his shoulder, her cries softening into exhausted whimpers. Ryan held her closer, feeling her tiny heart beating against his chest. In that moment, he understood that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with the choices that love demanded. His father had always said that medals weren't about glory, they were about doing what had to be done when it mattered most. As Ryan stood there, holding his hungry daughter and his father's legacy, he realized that maybe this was such a moment. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered again, gently touching the metals one last time. "But Grace needs this more than we need memories." The first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale brushstrokes of pink and gray as Ryan Cooper guided his worn pickup truck through the empty streets. In the rearview mirror, he could see Grace dozing in her car seat, her tiny fingers curled around a threadbare stuffed rabbit. The morning fog clung to the ground like a thick blanket, wrapping the small town in ghostly silence. Main Street was just beginning to stir. The local diner's neon open sign flickered to life, and Mr. Chen unlocked the front door of his corner grocery. Ryan's chest tightened as he drove past. That's where he'd bought Grace's formula until his credit card was declined last week. "Almost there, sweetheart," he whispered, though Grace slept on peacefully. The metals rested heavy in his jacket pocket, wrapped in a clean handkerchief. Each bump in the road seemed to make them press harder against his heart. Earl's Pawn and Antiques occupied a narrow brick building wedged between a laundromat and a boarded-up hardware store. The windows were clean but clouded with age, displaying an odd collection of vintage cameras and tarnished brass instruments. A hand-painted sign promised "Fair prices, honest deals," in faded gold lettering. Ryan parked and sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The morning light caught his wedding ring, and he thought of Emily. What would she think of him now? But Grace's empty bottle from the night before lay accusingly in the cup holder, answering his question. The store's bell chimed softly as Ryan pushed open the heavy wooden door, Grace cradled in one arm. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with narrow aisles created by tall shelves stretching toward a tin ceiling. Dusty treasures filled every available space. Old radios, leather-bound books, fishing gear, and countless items Ryan couldn't identify. Ancient clocks of various sizes filled one wall, their combined ticking creating a gentle rhythm like rain on a roof. The air smelled of lemon polish and aged wood, with undertones of machine oil and memories. Morning light filtered through the windows in pale shafts, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. "Be right with you," called a voice from the back. Ryan stood at the counter, absently swaying to keep Grace asleep. His fingers traced the edges of the handkerchief in his pocket. Earl Matthews emerged from behind a tall display case, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was tall and straight-backed despite his age, with white hair neatly combed and a clean plaid shirt tucked into pressed khakis. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who'd spent years in the sun, but his blue eyes were sharp and alert. He carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a military man. "Good morning," Earl said, his voice gentle as he noticed the sleeping baby. "What can I help you with today?" Ryan's throat felt dry. He'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times on the drive over, but now the words stuck like thorns. Grace stirred against his chest, and he drew strength from her warm weight. He began, then had to clear his throat. "I have something to sell." Earl nodded patiently, waiting as Ryan shifted Grace to his other arm and reached into his pocket. The handkerchief came out wrapped around its precious cargo. Ryan's hands shook slightly as he set it on the glass counter and carefully folded back the fabric. The medals caught the morning light, a bronze star, a purple heart, and several campaign medals, their ribbons faded but still proud. They'd been polished recently. Ryan had spent an hour cleaning them the night before, a final act of respect. Earl's expression changed the moment he saw them. The businesslike politeness fell away, replaced by something deeper, more reverent. His hands, when he reached for the medals, moved with the careful precision of someone handling sacred objects. "Vietnam?" Earl asked softly, examining the dates. "World War II," Ryan corrected. "They were my father's." Earl nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the engraved name with careful attention. The only sounds were Grace's soft breathing and the steady ticking of the clocks. After what seemed like hours, Earl looked up. His eyes held neither judgment nor pity, only understanding, which somehow made it harder for Ryan to bear. "These were earned by a man who understood sacrifice," Earl said softly. "Tell me, son, why are you selling them?" Ryan's throat felt tight as he stood before Earl's counter, his calloused fingers tracing the edges of the metal's display case. The morning light filtering through the dusty shop windows caught the brass surfaces, making them shine despite their age. Grace stirred in her carrier, making soft, cooing sounds that echoed in the quiet shop. "Sir, Ryan started, then paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like excuses. "My wife, Emily. She passed away 2 years ago. Car accident. Left me with our beautiful girl here." He gestured to Grace, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I worked maintenance at the high school, but with the medical bills from Emily's accident, and now the baby formula." His voice trailed off. Earl's weathered face remained composed, his eyes kind as they moved from the metals to Ryan's face and back again. The old man's hands, spotted with age but steady, carefully lifted each metal as if handling precious artifacts. "These metals," Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "they belonged to my father. He never talked much about the war, but he made sure I understood what they meant. Honor, sacrifice, everything he taught me." He swallowed hard. "I wouldn't be here if you had any other choice," Earl finished softly, nodding with understanding. The ancient floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he moved behind the counter. Ryan watched anxiously as Earl made his way to the old brass register. The morning silence was broken only by the gentle ticking of dozens of antique clocks that lined the walls, each marking time at its own pace. Grace whimpered softly, and Ryan automatically reached down to rock her carrier with one hand. The register drawer opened with a sharp ding that made Ryan flinch. He'd researched online what military medals typically went for, preparing himself for a fraction of their sentimental worth. Maybe enough for a few cans of formula, some diapers. Earl's hands emerged from beneath the counter, holding a thick stack of bills. $2,000, he said simply, placing the money on the counter between them. Ryan stared at the cash, certain he'd misheard. That's impossible. These medals, they're not worth anywhere near that much. I can't." "You can, and you will," Earl said firmly but kindly. His eyes, sharp despite his age, held Ryan's gaze. "This isn't charity, son. Consider it an exchange of faith." "I don't understand," Ryan stammered, his hands shaking slightly as he looked at the money. It was more than he made in 2 weeks of work. Earl carefully closed the display case containing the medals and pushed the cash closer to Ryan. "These medals represent one man's sacrifice for others. Now they're doing it again, just in a different way." He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "You'll repay it someday, in your own way." Ryan's vision blurred with unexpected tears. He blinked them back quickly, not wanting to break down in front of this stranger who was showing him such inexplicable kindness. Grace chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, making both men look down at her. "She has your eyes," Earl observed quietly. "And a fighter's spirit, I'd say." Ryan carefully picked up the money, his movements slow and deliberate, as if afraid it might disappear. "I don't know how to thank you." "Take care of your daughter," Earl replied simply. "That's all the thanks I need." Ryan nodded, unable to find more words. He gathered Grace's carrier, holding it close to his chest. The weight of the cash in his pocket felt both foreign and like a lifeline. As he turned to leave, the morning sun streaming through the shop's front window caught the dust motes in its beam, creating a golden haze around him and Grace. Later that night, Ryan sat in the old rocking chair by his apartment window, holding Grace as she finally, contentedly, drank from a full bottle. Her tiny hands wrapped around his fingers as she drank, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. The kitchen counter now held rows of formula cans, diapers, and baby supplies. There was food in the refrigerator, gas in the truck, and for the first time in months, the constant knot of anxiety in his chest had loosened slightly. Looking down at his daughter's peaceful face, Ryan whispered, "Maybe things can change." The morning sunlight streamed through Ryan's small kitchen window, casting warm geometric squares of golden light across the worn linoleum floor. Dust motes danced lazily in the amber beams, creating tiny galaxies that shifted with each breath of air from the old radiator. For the first time in weeks, the cheerful sizzle of butter melting on a hot griddle filled the cramped apartment with a rich, comforting aroma that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows of desperation. Grace sat perched in her second-hand high chair, her chubby fingers batting enthusiastically at a bright yellow plastic spoon while she cooed with pure delight at the familiar, promising smell of breakfast. Her little legs kicked with excitement beneath the faded Mickey Mouse bib that had seen better days, and her eyes, so much like Emily's, sparkled with innocent joy. "Just like your mom used to make, sweetheart," Ryan said softly, his voice thick with memory, as he watched the pale pancake batter spread into a perfect expanding circle on the griddle surface. The batter bubbled gently around the edges, promising the kind of fluffy breakfast Emily had made every Sunday morning before Grace was born. He'd actually splurged on real maple syrup, the expensive kind in the glass bottle, and a small container of fresh, plump blueberries. These were luxuries that had been absolutely unthinkable just yesterday, when counting loose change for a loaf of bread felt like an impossible math problem. The sight of their fully stocked refrigerator, humming contentedly in the corner, still made his heart skip with overwhelming gratitude. Milk, eggs, fresh fruit, actual vegetables, instead of whatever was cheapest and closest to expiring. The abundance felt almost surreal after months of creative rationing and careful portion control. Grace squealed with delight and kicked her feet more vigorously as Ryan flipped the golden pancake with practiced ease, the satisfying flip sending it airborne for just a moment before it landed perfectly back in the pan. "Almost ready, my little sunshine," he smiled, the motion feeling natural and unforced on his face after so many weeks of worry lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth. The intimidating stack of overdue bills on the counter, red stamps and final notices that had haunted his peripheral vision for weeks, no longer looked like an insurmountable mountain threatening to crush them both. Earlier that morning, before Grace had even stirred in her crib, he'd walked the 3 blocks to the building manager's cramped office and paid half of what he owed in back rent. The crisp 20s had felt substantial and real in his hands, not like the crumpled singles and quarters he'd been scraping together for months. Mrs. Martinez, their patient building manager with her silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, had squeezed his weathered hand between both of hers, her lined face brightening with genuine relief. "You're a good father, Mr. Cooper," she'd said, her slight accent wrapping around the words like a warm embrace. "I never doubted you'd find a way. Things will get better now. You'll see." After a leisurely breakfast where Grace managed to get more blueberry-stained pancake on her face and bib than in her mouth, Ryan cleaned her sticky fingers and face with gentle wipes, marveling at how something as simple as fluffy pancakes and real syrup could bring such radiant joy to a 10-month-old. Her giggles echoed off the kitchen walls like music he'd forgotten existed. He settled her contentedly in her playpen, surrounded by soft toys and colorful blocks, while he tackled the household tasks he'd been putting off for weeks. The ancient washing machine in the building's dim basement hummed rhythmically with its first full load in over a month. Ryan had bought actual name-brand detergent instead of the generic powder that barely removed stains, and the fresh, clean scent rising from the churning water felt like a small miracle. He'd even found enough quarters in his jacket pocket for the temperamental dryer, which meant Grace's clothes would be soft and warm instead of stiff from air drying on the radiator. Between loads of laundry, Ryan sat at his small, scratched desk by the window, carefully writing on his best piece of paper cream-colored stationery Emily had bought for thank-you notes they'd never had occasion to send. His handwriting, usually hurried and practical, took on deliberate care as he formed each letter. "Dear Mr. Matthews, your unexpected kindness yesterday meant more than you could possibly know. You didn't just help feed my daughter, you gave us both hope when I thought we'd lost it completely. I'd like to thank you properly in person, if you'll allow me." He paused, his pen hovering over the paper, as he searched for words adequate to express the depth of his gratitude without sounding desperate or overly emotional. How could he explain that Earl's generosity had done more than solve an immediate crisis? It had reminded him that goodness still existed in the world, that strangers could care about each other's struggles. In the end, he kept it simple and sincere, signing his name with careful loops and adding his phone number in neat, small numbers below his signature. The afternoon brought unexpected moments of peace that felt foreign after months of constant worry. Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door waved cheerfully as she passed his open window, her weathered face creasing into a smile as Grace's happy giggles drifted into the hallway. "So good to hear that beautiful sound again," she said with the knowing smile of someone who'd noticed the long, quiet weeks that had preceded this morning's laughter. Ryan realized with a start that it had been far too long since genuine joy had filled their small home, since Grace's delighted squeals had echoed off these walls. Between folding warm, sweet-smelling laundry that actually felt soft against his hands and preparing Grace's bottles for the next day with formula that didn't require careful rationing, He browsed job listings on his phone with renewed energy. His security guard certification was still valid for another 8 months, and several promising positions had opened up at the sprawling medical center across town. The pay was decent, the hours steady, and they offered benefits after 90 days. He submitted 3 detailed applications, feeling more qualified and confident than he had in months. His military experience suddenly seeming like an asset rather than a burden. The local newspaper's classified section, spread across his coffee table next to Grace's toys, showed 2 established security firms actively seeking to hire veterans specifically. Ryan circled them with a red pen, already planning his approach, rehearsing in his mind how he'd present his infantry experience as valuable training for civilian security work. His time in Iraq might finally open some doors, instead of just haunting his restless dreams with memories of dusty checkpoints and endless patrols. Around 2 o'clock, with Grace napping peacefully in her car seat, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of deep sleep, Ryan drove the familiar route back to Earl's Pawn and Antiques. The thank you note sat carefully folded in his shirt pocket, pressed against his heart where he could feel its presence with every breath. He'd even stopped at the corner diner to pick up a small coffee black, the way he'd noticed Earl preferred it during their conversation the night before. But as he pulled his battered sedan into the cramped, pothole-riddled parking lot, his heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water. The familiar neon open sign that had glowed warmly in the window was completely dark, its cheerful red letters cold and lifeless. Through the grimy window glass, he could see that the shop's interior was draped in shadows and stillness. No gentle tick of antique clocks marking time. No warm glow of desktop lamps, creating pools of amber light. No movement or life whatsoever. Ryan stepped out of his car slowly, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he approached the storefront with growing confusion. His footsteps echoed hollowly off the empty concrete, the sound somehow amplified in the strange quiet that surrounded the building. There, taped somewhat crookedly to the large front window with clear packaging tape, was a simple white sign with stark black letters that seemed to shout their message. For sale, property vacant, contact Meridian Realty. He pressed his face against the cool glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside and block out the afternoon glare. The wooden counter where Earl had so carefully counted out those life-changing $20 bills was completely bare, its surface showing rectangular dust outlines where a cash register and various small items had once Saturday. The tall shelves that had held countless treasures, vintage watches, military memorabilia, musical instruments, and forgotten heirlooms stood utterly empty, their metal framework casting long shadows across the barren interior. Only faint dust outlines remained on the shelves, ghostly reminders of what had filled this space with such character just 24 hours ago. Ryan reached out tentatively to touch the door handle, though he already knew with sinking certainty that it would be locked tight. The metal was cold and completely unyielding under his fingers, offering no give whatsoever when he tried the handle. Behind him in the car, Grace stirred slightly in her car seat, making the soft, contented sounds of deep sleep that somehow echoed his own growing confusion and disbelief. The carefully written thank you note seemed to burn like a coal in his shirt pocket as he stared at the vacant shop, his mind struggling to understand how a place so full of warmth and life yesterday could disappear so completely and mysteriously today, as if Earl Matthews and his treasure-filled sanctuary had been nothing more than a dream. Ryan's knuckles rapped against the glass door of Earl's Pawn and Antiques. The hollow sound echoed down the empty street. Through the dusty window, he could see the familiar shelves now bare, their treasures packed away. The vintage clock that had ticked so steadily yesterday hung silent on the wall. "Earl?" he called out, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside. "Are you there?" Grace squirmed in her carrier, and Ryan adjusted her weight to his other arm. The store remained dark and still. He tried the handle one more time, but it wouldn't budge. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread wafted from the cafe next door. As Ryan stood there wondering what to do next, the cafe's screen door creaked open. "He's not there, honey," a woman's voice called out. "Left sometime in the night." Ryan turned to see a plump woman in her 60s, wearing a flour-dusted apron, watching him from the cafe's entrance. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and laugh lines crinkled around her eyes. "I'm Marla Jensen," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've run this cafe for 30 years. Come on in, you look like you could use a cup of coffee." Ryan hesitated, but Grace chose that moment to fuss. The promise of a warm place to sit won out. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm Ryan Cooper." Inside, the cafe felt like stepping back in time. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and a chrome-edged counter gleamed under soft lighting. A few early morning regulars hunched over their newspapers and coffee cups. Marla led him to a booth near the window. "Set that sweet baby down and have a seat," she said, already pouring coffee into a thick white mug. "On the house." Ryan settled Grace's carrier beside him in the booth. "I appreciate it. I needed to thank Earl for something he did for us yesterday. Do you know where he went?" Marla's eyes sparkled with interest. "Earl Matthews helping someone? Now there's a story I'd like to hear." She slid into the seat across from him. "That man's been a mystery since he showed up here 5 years ago." "What do you mean?" "Well," Marla leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Word is he used to be quite somebody. A billionaire, if you can believe it. Made his fortune in real estate development after Vietnam. They say he was some kind of war hero too, though he never talked about it." Ryan's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "A billionaire? Running a pawn shop?" "Sold everything about 10 years back. Just gave it all away." Marla shook her head. "Nobody knows exactly why. But Tommy, he drives the mail truck, swears Earl's been helping veterans in secret, paying medical bills, funding rehab programs, that sort of thing." Ryan remembered Earl's words about the medals. These were earned by a man who understood sacrifice. The pieces started fitting together differently now. "The strange thing is," Marla continued, "he never wanted credit. Lived in that little apartment above the shop, drove an old pickup truck. You'd never know he had 2 dimes to rub together, let alone millions." Grace cooed softly, and Ryan gave her his finger to hold.
"Did he say where he was going?"
"That's just it. Nobody knows. Place was empty this morning, just that 'for sale' sign in the window." Marla stood up, brushing crumbs from her apron. "You want some breakfast? You look like you could use a good meal." "Thanks, but we should get going." Ryan carefully lifted Grace's carrier. "I appreciate the coffee and the information." Back home that evening, after putting Grace down in her crib, Ryan sat at his small desk and opened his laptop. The screen's blue light illuminated his tired face as he typed "Earl Matthews, Vietnam veteran billionaire" into the search bar. Several old newspaper articles appeared. One from 15 years ago showed a younger Earl in an expensive suit, cutting a ribbon at a building dedication. Another mentioned the Valor Hands Foundation, describing it as a mysterious charitable organization that had helped thousands of veterans rebuild their lives. The most recent article, dated 10 years ago, announced Earl's surprising decision to sell his real estate empire. The photo showed him outside his corporate headquarters, looking grim but determined. The caption read, "Matthews liquidates billion-dollar empire, cites personal reasons." Ryan clicked through the articles, his eyes growing heavy. Grace slept peacefully in her crib beside his desk, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. He looked at her, then back at Earl's photo on the screen. "Who are you really, Earl?" he murmured, the question hanging in the quiet room. The warehouse supervisor's words still rang in Ryan's ears as he cleared out his locker. "Sorry, Cooper. We need someone with more management experience." 3 days of stewing over another denied promotion had finally pushed him to his limit. 8 months of lifting boxes, working overtime, and still barely making ends meet. Something had to change. Ryan pulled his father's medals from beneath his work shirts, their polished surface catching the fluorescent light. Earl's generosity had bought them time, but Ryan knew money wasn't the only thing he owed the mysterious pawnbroker. There was something about the old man's eyes when he'd looked at those medals, something that spoke of shared sacrifice and understanding. Back home, Grace crawled on her playmat while Ryan sat at his small kitchen table, laptop open. The Valor Hands Foundation's website showed an impressive list of veteran support programs, but finding Earl proved harder than expected. Ryan dialed the foundation's number, holding Grace with one arm as the phone rang. "Valor Hands Foundation. How may I direct your call?" a cheerful voice answered. "I'm trying to reach Earl Matthews," Ryan said, bouncing Grace gently as she started to fuss. A pause. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Matthews doesn't take calls. Please, it's important. He helped me recently at his pawn shop." "Sir, I understand. But Mr. Matthews is very private. He's helped many veterans over the years, but he doesn't—" "I have something of his," Ryan interrupted. "Something important I need to return. I can pass along a message, but thank you anyway, Ryan said, hanging up. He looked down at Grace, who stared back with her mother's eyes. Looks like we're doing this the hard way, sweetheart. Ryan packed efficiently, skills from his army days kicking in. Diapers, formula, extra clothes for Grace. His own bag was sparse. 2 changes of clothes, toiletries, and his father's medals wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. He'd found Earl's old business records online, showing a string of pawn shops in towns across the state. The closest was 2 hours away. As Ryan strapped Grace into her car seat, Mrs. Martinez from next door called out, "Going somewhere?" "Road trip," Ryan answered, managing a smile. "Following up on a job lead." She nodded knowingly. "About time. You're worth more than that warehouse, Ryan Cooper. Your papa would have said the same." The mention of his father sent a familiar ache through Ryan's chest. He waved goodbye and slid behind the wheel, adjusting the rear-view mirror to see Grace already dozing off. The highway stretched before them, morning sun warming the asphalt. Ryan's mind wandered to memories of his father, not the frail man in the VA hospital bed, but the strong figure who'd taught him to fish, to change a tire, to stand up for what was right. He remembered the night before deploying to Iraq, his father pressing something into his palm, his own service ring. "Honor isn't in the medals, son," he'd said, voice rough with emotion. "It's in what you do when nobody's watching." Ryan glanced at Grace in the mirror. "Your grandpa was something else, kiddo. Wish you could have met him." She cooed in response, tiny fingers reaching for a shaft of sunlight. The miles rolled by, towns blending into countryside and back again. Ryan stopped twice for diaper changes and once for lunch at a small diner where the waitress fawned over Grace. Each mile brought questions. Would Earl even be there? What would Ryan say if he found him? The medals felt like they were burning a hole in his duffel bag. Late afternoon, sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Ryan pulled into the small town of Mill Creek. The Veterans Community Center sat on a quiet street, its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. A simple banner hung above the entrance. "Hope for Heroes Volunteers, welcome." Ryan parked, studying the building. A few cars dotted the lot, and warm light spilled from the windows. Through the glass, he could see people moving about, some in wheelchairs, others with canes or prosthetic limbs. All of them carried themselves with that unmistakable military bearing. Grace stirred in her car seat, making those little sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. Ryan reached back to touch her tiny hand. "What do you say, sweetheart? Ready to meet some heroes?" The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Ryan gathered their bags in Grace's carrier. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his father's medals in his bag and remembering Earl's words about repaying faith in his own way. The glass door squeaked as Ryan pushed it open, the smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies washing over him. Inside the Veterans Community Center, afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. Volunteers in red vests moved between folding tables, distributing snacks and paperwork to veterans of various ages. Grace squirmed in her carrier, drawing curious smiles from the people nearby. Ryan adjusted her blanket, scanning the room. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted a familiar figure in gray coveralls, methodically wiping down tables and refilling paper cups. Earl Matthews moved with the same quiet dignity he'd shown in the pawn shop, but here he blended seamlessly into the background. No one seemed to notice the supposed billionaire as he gathered empty coffee cups and wiped down tables with careful precision. His weathered hands worked steadily, his eyes downcast as if trying to remain invisible. Ryan stood frozen, Grace's carrier suddenly feeling heavier in his grip. The weight of the medals in his jacket pockets seemed to increase too, pulling him forward. He watched Earl stop to help an elderly veteran with a walker, guiding him gently to a chair with the natural instinct of someone used to serving others. "Earl," Ryan called softly, not wanting to startle the older man. Earl's shoulders stiffened slightly, but he didn't turn around immediately. He finished helping the veteran get settled, placed a fresh cup of coffee on the table, then slowly faced Ryan. His expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes flickered briefly to Grace. "You found me." Earl's voice carried the same gentle strength Ryan remembered. "I had a feeling you might." "I needed to thank you properly," Ryan said, stepping closer. "What you did that night, you saved my daughter's life. You saved both of us, really." Earl shook his head, moving to wipe another table. I just helped a soldier's son do what soldiers do: survive. His movements remained steady, practiced. Sometimes we all need a hand up, nothing more to it than that. Ryan reached into his jacket, pulling out the carefully wrapped medals. These belong to you now. I can't keep them, not after everything. No. Earl's response was immediate but quiet. He stopped wiping the table but didn't look up. Those medals were earned. They represent sacrifice, duty, honor. They're not mine to take. But the money you gave me was given freely, Earl interrupted, finally meeting Ryan's eyes. Just like those medals were earned freely. Some things can't be bought back, son. Shouldn't be bought back. Ryan felt his throat tighten. Grace cooed softly in her carrier, drawing Earl's attention. The older man's face softened as he looked at her. She's growing well, Earl observed, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Strong, like her father. Because of you, Ryan insisted. I don't understand why you helped us, why you're here now, working as a janitor? Earl's smile was gentle. It's honest work. Keeps me busy. Keeps me connected to the people who matter. He gestured around the room at the veterans. These men and women, they're my family now. Just like I had another family long ago in a different war. Earl walked slowly toward the far wall, where photographs of service members hung in simple frames. Ryan followed, carefully maneuvering Grace's carrier through the tables. Earl stopped before a particular photo, pointing with a slightly trembling finger. The black and white image showed two soldiers in Vietnam-era uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning despite the mud and exhaustion evident on their faces. The younger man on the left was clearly Earl. The other man's features struck Ryan like a physical blow, the same jaw, the same steady eyes he'd seen in his father's other photos. Below the photo, a simple brass plate read, Captain Thomas Cooper, your father, Earl said softly, was more than my commanding officer. He saved my life in more ways than one, taught me what it meant to lead with compassion, to serve with honor. He turned to face Ryan fully. When you walked into my shop with his medals, I knew exactly who you were. Thomas Cooper's boy has his eyes. Ryan stared at the photograph, at his father's young face frozen in time, standing beside the man who'd saved his daughter's future. The coincidence felt too perfect, too meaningful to be chance. Grace reached out from her carrier, tiny fingers grasping at air, and Earl gently offered her his hand. She gripped his finger tight, gurgling happily. 3 generations connected by sacrifice, duty, and now, an act of grace that had brought them full circle. Ryan felt the medals in his pocket, understanding at last that their true value lay not in the medal and ribbon, but in the bonds they represented, bonds that could never be pawned or purchased, only passed forward in acts of kindness. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead as Ryan sat across from Earl at one of the empty folding tables. The other volunteers and veterans had gone home, leaving the community center in that strange, hollow silence that follows a busy day. Coffee cups and cookie crumbs littered the nearby tables, forgotten in the rush of closing time. Grace slept peacefully in her carrier, her tiny fist curled around the edge of her pink blanket. Earl's eyes kept drifting to her, a gentle smile softening the deep lines around his mouth. Your father, Earl began, his voice rough with emotion, was the bravest man I ever knew. He reached into his coverall pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From inside, he carefully extracted a creased photograph, handling it like a precious artifact. The photo showed 2 young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning despite the mud and exhaustion evident on their faces. Ryan recognized his father immediately, the same strong jaw, the same kind eyes that looked back at him from his own mirror every morning. This was taken 3 days before it happened, Earl said, passing the photo to Ryan. September 1969, just outside Da Nang. We'd been running supply missions, trying to keep the roads clear. His fingers trembled slightly as he wrapped them around his empty coffee cup. That morning started like any other, humid, the air so thick you could drink it. Ryan leaned forward, his heart pounding. His father had never talked much about Vietnam, carrying those memories to his grave. Our convoy hit a mine, Earl continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. The truck in front of us went up first. I was driving the second vehicle. The blast knocked us off the road, and we rolled. He closed his eyes, lost in the memory. The fuel tank ruptured. I was trapped in the cab, my leg pinned under the dashboard. The flames were spreading fast. Ryan could barely breathe, picturing the scene with terrible clarity. "Your father," Earl's voice cracked. "He ran through enemy fire to reach me. The heat was unbearable, but he wouldn't leave. He worked until he got me free, carried me to safety, caught some shrapnel in his back doing it." Earl opened his eyes, meeting Ryan's gaze. "The doctors said I would have died in another minute. But Thomas, your father," he just smiled and said, "No brother gets left behind." Tears welled in Ryan's eyes. He touched the old photograph gently, tracing his father's young face with a trembling finger. "I tried to repay him," Earl said. "But how do you repay someone for your life? I carried that debt, that gratitude, for 50 years. He gestured to the sleeping Grace. "When I saw you in my shop with your little girl, when I learned who you were, it felt like God himself had given me a chance to finally honor that debt." Ryan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Dad never mentioned any of this." "He wouldn't have," Earl nodded. "Thomas wasn't the kind to brag. He did what was right because it was right, not for glory or recognition." The old man's shoulders sagged slightly, and he pulled another photo from his wallet. This one showed a younger Earl in a business suit, standing proudly next to a handsome man in desert camouflage. "My son, Michael," Earl explained softly. "He wanted to serve like his old man. Made me proud and terrified at the same time." His weathered hands gripped the photo tightly. "He was in Afghanistan, leading a team protecting a school construction project. They came under heavy fire. Michael," Earl's voice caught. "He got his whole unit to safety but took a bullet doing it. Just like your father, putting others first, no matter the cost." Ryan watched as Earl carefully returned the photos to his wallet. The old man's eyes were distant, filled with a pain that time hadn't dulled. "After Michael died, none of it meant anything anymore," Earl continued. "The real estate empire, the billions in the bank, it all felt hollow. I started selling everything, giving the money away, focused on helping veterans, trying to honor Michael's memory." He gestured around the community center. "But I couldn't stand the attention, the press calling me a philanthropist, so I disappeared. Opened that little pawn shop, started helping people quietly, one at a time." Ryan looked down at his father's medals, still unable to believe the connection between their families. His voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "Dad used to tell me that sacrifice isn't about dying, it's about how we live for others." Earl nodded, a tear rolling down his weathered cheek. "Your father taught me that lesson in Vietnam. Michael lived it in Afghanistan." He reached across the table, placing his hand over the medals. "These aren't just pieces of metal, son. They're reminders that love is stronger than death, that honor lives on in how we treat each other." Grace stirred in her carrier, making soft baby sounds in her sleep. Both men looked at her, seeing in her innocent face the future their loved ones had died protecting. Ryan picked up the medals, their weight feeling different now, heavier with meaning. His voice was barely above a whisper as he said, "Maybe our fathers are still leading us, even now." Note: stopped here as this concludes the required scene elements. The emotional revelation about Ryan's father saving Earl, Earl's explanation about his son and fortune, and ending with Ryan's whispered realization about their father's continuing influence. The morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Ryan pulled up in his weathered sedan. Grace babbled happily in her car seat, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. It was barely 7, but already a few veterans milled around the entrance, some nursing coffee cups, others smoking cigarettes in the crisp morning air. Ryan lifted Grace from her car seat, breathing in her baby powder scent as he settled her against his chest. Her tiny fingers gripped his shirt while he grabbed the old toolbox from the trunk, the same one his father had used for household repairs years ago. Inside, the center buzzed with quiet energy. The coffee pot gurgled in the corner kitchen, and someone had set out day-old donuts on a paper plate. Earl stood near the bulletin board, reviewing a list of repair jobs that seemed to grow longer each day. "Good morning," Ryan called out, adjusting Grace on his hip. Earl turned, his face brightening. "You're early." He nodded at the toolbox. "Ready to work?" "Yes, sir." Ryan set Grace up in her portable playpen near the front desk where Mary, an elderly volunteer, had offered to watch her. The other veterans drifted over, cooing at Grace and offering her little waves that made her giggle. Ryan started with the broken door hinges in the counseling room. As he worked, veterans would stop by, some offering to help, others just wanting to talk. A former Marine named Dave held the door steady, while Ryan replaced the pins. "You know," Dave said, his voice quiet, "I couldn't sleep for 3 years after Fallujah. Still can't sometimes." Ryan paused, screwdriver mid-turn. "The nightmares?" "Yeah. You too?" "Used to wake up thinking I was still there. Took me a while to learn it was okay to need help." More veterans gathered as the morning wore on. Between repair jobs, they shared stories not just of war, but of coming home, of struggling to find peace. Ryan fixed a leaky faucet while listening to Tom, a Vietnam vet, describe how gardening helped his anxiety. He patched holes in the drywall as Sarah, who'd served as a medic in Afghanistan, talked about finding purpose in nursing school. Earl moved through the center like a quiet guardian, refilling coffee cups, offering a supportive word here and there. But Ryan noticed how he watched their interactions, saw the pride that straightened his shoulders when veterans who hadn't spoken in weeks joined the conversations. By afternoon, the local news van pulled up outside. A young reporter had heard about the center's work with veterans and wanted to do a feature story. She interviewed several vets, but seemed most interested in Ryan and Earl's unexpected friendship. "It's like a modern fairy tale," she said, adjusting her microphone. "The struggling single dad and the secret billionaire who helped him." Earl shifted uncomfortably. "Just 2 veterans helping each other," he corrected gently. "That's all this place is, about veterans taking care of their own." Ryan nodded, adding, "Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything." He glanced at Grace, who was now being entertained by a group of veterans making silly faces at her. Her laughter echoed through the hall, bringing smiles to weather-worn faces. The camera captured moments throughout the day, Ryan teaching younger vets basic home repair skills, Earl quietly counseling a troubled veteran in the corner, Grace being passed from one set of careful arms to another like a precious symbol of hope. As the day wound down and the news crew packed up, Earl approached Ryan, who was putting away his tools. "You've done good work today, son." Earl's voice was gruff with emotion. "Would you and Grace like to come to dinner tonight?" "Nothing fancy. Just my place out by Miller's Creek." Ryan looked up, surprised. Mary, who was helping clean up nearby, nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Earl Matthews? Inviting someone to his home?" she whispered loudly to another volunteer. "I never thought I'd see the day." Earl's ears reddened slightly, but he held Ryan's gaze. "It's just a small cabin. Not much to look at, but the view of the creek is nice at sunset." Ryan felt the weight of the invitation, understood what it meant for a man who'd walled himself off from the world for so long. "We'd be honored," he said simply. Grace chose that moment to squeal with delight, reaching for Earl's familiar face from Ryan's arms. The old man's eyes crinkled with genuine joy, and for a moment he looked younger, unburdened. "Well, that settles it then," Earl said, chucking Grace under her chin. "Follow my truck when you're ready. It's about time I had some real company for dinner." The cabin's warm light spilled through the windows into the gathering dusk, creating a cozy sanctuary against the autumn chill. Inside, the rich aroma of beef stew filled the small living room where Earl Matthews sat in his worn leather armchair, his weathered hands holding a small wooden toy soldier he'd carved himself. Grace, perched on his knee, reached for it with delighted squeals. "Careful now, little one," Earl said softly, letting her tiny fingers explore the smooth surface. "Been making these longer than your daddy's been alive." Ryan watched from his spot on the threadbare couch, amazed at how natural it felt his daughter bonding with this man who'd changed their lives so profoundly. The cabin itself told Earl's story. Simple furniture, books everywhere, and walls covered with military photographs and medals, not his own, but those of others he'd helped over the years. "She's usually shy with strangers," Ryan observed, stirring his stew. "But she took to you right away." Earl's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Children and dogs, they know good souls from bad. My Michael used to say that." His voice caught slightly on his son's name. Grace grabbed the wooden soldier, immediately trying to put it in her mouth. Earl chuckled, gently redirecting her attention to the toy's moving arms instead. "You make all these yourself?" Ryan asked, noticing a shelf lined with similar carvings. "Started in Vietnam. Kept the hands busy during watch." Earl adjusted Grace on his knee. "Michael learned too. We'd sit right here, carving together after he came back from deployments. He had bigger dreams, though." Ryan leaned forward, sensing the weight in Earl's words. What kind of dreams? Earl was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the toy soldier's edges. He wanted to build something. Called it Grace House. Funny coincidence, that name. He glanced at the baby. It was going to be a place for veteran families. Not just a shelter, but a real home. Somewhere kids could play while their parents got back on their feet, where no one had to choose between feeding their children and keeping their dignity. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Ryan set his bowl down, his heart racing with sudden purpose. "We could do it," he said quietly. Earl's head snapped up. "What?" "Build Grace House. Make Michael's dream real." Ryan's voice grew stronger. "The community center's struggling anyway. We could transform it, expand it. You've got the experience, the connections. I know construction, and there are plenty of vets who'd help." "Son, Earl's voice wavered. "I gave away most of my fortune years ago. What's left is tied up in trust funds for veterans' medical care, and the last project I tried." He trailed off, pain flickering across his face. "This isn't about money," Ryan pressed gently. "It's about purpose, about honoring the men who taught us what service means." He reached for his daughter, who crawled happily into his lap. "My dad, your son, they knew the cost of sacrifice. But they also knew the power of building something that lasts." Earl's hands trembled slightly as he set the wooden soldier down. "I'm too old to start over, too tired to fail again." "You're not starting over," Ryan said firmly. "You're continuing what Michael began, what my father fought for." He bounced Grace on his knee, making her giggle. "Look at her, Earl. She's here because you helped us when we were desperate. How many other families need that same chance?" The old man's eyes glistened as he watched Grace reach for the toy soldier again. The cabin grew quiet except for her happy babbling and the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Michael used to sketch his plans right there at the kitchen table," Earl finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "He'd talk for hours about having a playground, a garden where the kids could grow things, a place where veterans could heal by helping each other." Ryan nodded, feeling the momentum building. "That's exactly what we need. Not another institution, a home. A real community." Earl stood slowly, walking to a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a worn leather journal and opened it carefully. Inside were detailed sketches, floor plans, garden layouts, notes in a young soldier's determined handwriting. He had it all planned out, Earl whispered, touching the pages gently. "Right down to the color of the front door." "Then, let's build it," Ryan said simply. "For Michael. For my dad. For Grace." Earl looked at the journal, then at the baby playing contentedly in Ryan's lap. His shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, as if some long-carried weight was shifting. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Nothing worth doing ever is," Ryan replied. "But we're not alone. The veterans at the center, they need this too. A chance to build something bigger than themselves." Earl's eyes met Ryan's, and in them was a spark of the determination that had once built an empire. He took a deep breath, tears welling but not falling. "Then let's build Grace House," he whispered. Autumn faded into winter as Grace House began taking shape, transforming from dream into reality with each passing day. The abandoned McKinley building, once a crumbling neighborhood eyesore with boarded windows and peeling paint, now buzzed with renewed energy each morning. The sound of hammers and power tools echoed through the halls where silence had reigned for years. Ryan arrived early every day, his breath visible in the cold morning air, thermos of steaming coffee clutched in one hand while Grace rode snugly bundled against the cold in her carrier. The familiar weight of her against his chest had become a comfort, a reminder of why every nail mattered, every board counted. "Look who's here," Earl called out from across the main floor, where he supervised a group of veterans carefully installing new windows. His voice carried the warmth of genuine affection, and his breath formed small clouds in the crisp air. The old man moved between the workers with practiced ease, checking measurements and offering encouragement. "Our littlest supervisors come to inspect the work again." Grace squealed with delight and waved her tiny mittened hands as veterans throughout the room paused their work to greet her. These men, once strangers bound only by shared service and hidden wounds, had become an extended family over the past weeks. The transformation was remarkable. Faces that had been closed off and guarded now lit up at the sight of the baby. Tommy, a former Marine whose muscled arms were covered in faded tattoos that told stories of deployments and brotherhood, immediately set down his hammer to make exaggerated funny faces at Grace. His tough exterior melted completely when she giggled, revealing the gentle soul beneath the warrior's mask. Mike, a quiet man who rarely spoke about his 3 tours in Afghanistan, and whose eyes still held shadows of distant battles, always saved a piece of his afternoon chocolate bar for her, breaking it into tiny pieces she could gum safely. "How's the plumbing situation coming along down there?" Ryan asked, settling Grace down in her colorful playpen near the makeshift office they'd set up in what used to be a storage closet. The space was cramped, but functional, with folding tables covered in blueprints, permits, and supply lists. Earl gestured toward the basement stairs, where the steady sound of work echoed upward. "Jim's got the hot water running strong in the entire east wing now. Says we'll have the whole building's plumbing system completely finished by Thursday if the new fixtures arrive on schedule." He pulled out the detailed blueprints with obvious pride, spreading them carefully across the largest folding table. "The grant money from the Veterans Affairs Office came through yesterday, every penny we requested. We can break ground on the family apartment wing next week." Each day brought small victories that felt monumental to the men who achieved them. In the spacious kitchen, Chef Marcus, who'd once cooked for an entire battalion in the scorching heat of Iraq, tested the gleaming new industrial stove by making massive pots of thick, hearty chili for the growing work crew. The rich aroma drew everyone in at lunchtime, filling the newly refurbished dining hall with animated conversation and genuine laughter that hadn't echoed in these walls for decades. "Never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be holding a spatula instead of a rifle," Marcus said with a grin, ladling out generous portions into mismatched bowls. Sweat beaded on his dark forehead despite the cool air, and his eyes held a contentment that had been missing for years. "But this feels right, you know? This feels like coming home." Ryan knew exactly what he meant, understanding the sentiment in his bones. He watched Tommy, patiently teaching another veteran how to properly patch drywall, their shared focus and quiet concentration healing something deeper than the visible holes in the damaged plaster. In the backyard, Mike had started an ambitious vegetable garden, carefully marking off neat plots for spring planting with wooden stakes and string. The same calloused hands that once handled deadly weapons now gently pressed tiny seeds into dark, fertile soil with infinite tenderness. Grace took her first wobbly steps in what would become the children's bright playroom. She toddled unsteadily across the freshly laid blue carpet, her face scrunched in concentration before tumbling safely into Ryan's waiting arms as paint-splattered veterans throughout the room erupted in spontaneous cheers and applause. Earl quickly captured the precious moment on his phone, his weathered eyes suspiciously moist with unshed tears. "Your beautiful mama would be so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart," Ryan whispered to Grace that evening as they walked slowly through the nearly finished first floor. "Look what you helped build with your brave little heart." The walls, once gray and neglected with years of abandonment, now shone with warm, welcoming colors, chosen democratically by the veterans themselves. Framed photographs of service members from every conflict lined the freshly painted hallways, a powerful visual history of sacrifice, honor, and unwavering courage. One chilly morning, Ryan arrived to find Earl already there despite the early hour, hunched over building plans in the weak, gray dawn light streaming through the new windows. The old man looked unusually tired, his normally straight shoulders slightly curved, and his movements seemed slower and more deliberate than usual. "You're here awfully early today," Ryan observed gently, setting down 2 steaming cups of black coffee on the table beside the blueprints. "Couldn't sleep much last night," Earl replied with a tired smile, absently rubbing his chest with his left hand. "Too much excitement building up about the official ribbon-cutting ceremony next week, I suppose." He straightened up with visible effort, immediately waving off Ryan's concerned look with characteristic stubbornness. "Just getting old and creaky, son. Nothing for you to worry your head about." The transformation wasn't limited to just the physical building. Ryan witnessed it daily in the men and women who came to help. The gradual way they began standing straighter, smiling more easily and genuinely, finding renewed purpose in each meaningful task. Veterans who'd isolated themselves completely for years after their service now showed up faithfully every day, eager to contribute their skills and energy. They shared hearty meals, swapped war stories and memories, and slowly, carefully rebuilt the deep camaraderie and brotherhood they'd lost after leaving military service behind. Grace became the project's beloved unofficial mascot and source of constant joy, She napped peacefully in the office, while Ryan coordinated supply deliveries and managed contractors, played endless games of peekaboo with volunteers during their coffee breaks, and effortlessly charmed potential donors who came to tour the evolving facility. Earl doted on her like the most devoted grandfather, always keeping a secret stash of Cheerios in his jacket pocket, specifically for her tiny hands. As the highly anticipated ribbon-cutting ceremony approached, the pace of work intensified dramatically. Final safety inspections were scheduled and passed. Furniture and equipment were delivered and carefully arranged, and state-of-the-art security systems were professionally installed. Ryan couldn't help but notice Earl taking increasingly frequent breaks, discreetly sitting down whenever he thought no one was watching his every move. The day before the ceremony, the first snow of the season began falling in fat, lazy flakes. Earl stood motionless at the large front window, watching the white flakes drift past like memories, his weathered hand pressed firmly against his chest. His breathing seemed slightly labored, though he tried to hide it. "You feeling okay there?" Ryan asked with growing concern, coming to stand close beside his mentor and friend. "Just the cold winter air getting to these tired old bones," Earl said with what Ryan recognized as a forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing a hot cup of strong coffee won't fix right up." Ryan wasn't entirely convinced by the reassurance, but Earl had already turned away with determined purpose, calling out detailed instructions to volunteers who were hanging festive evergreen wreaths for tomorrow's celebration. Grace, captivated by watching the swirling snow from her secure playpen, clapped her small hands together in pure delight, blissfully unaware of the growing concern clouding her father's watchful eyes. The December morning dawned bright and cold, frost glazing the windows of the newly renovated Grace house. Red and blue balloons bobbed in the winter breeze, and a hand-painted banner stretched across the entrance proclaimed, "Welcome home, heroes." The parking lot filled quickly with cars, their exhaust creating misty clouds in the crisp air. Ryan adjusted his tie borrowed from Earl and bounced Grace on his hip. She wore a tiny red dress for the occasion, her dark curls tied with matching ribbons. Through the main entrance he could see the transformed interior. Where peeling paint and broken tiles once dominated, warm colors and gleaming floors now welcomed visitors. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods wafted from the newly equipped kitchen. "Ready for the big moment?" Earl appeared beside them, looking distinguished in his navy suit despite signs of fatigue around his eyes. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his Vietnam service pins glinted on his lapel. "As ready as I'll ever be," Ryan replied, noticing how Earl pressed one hand against the wall for support. "You okay?" "Just excited." Earl waved off his concern with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's get this show on the road." The main hall filled with families, veterans, and local officials. Children darted between chairs while parents chatted, creating a warm buzz of conversation. Chef Marcus had outdone himself with a spread of refreshments that covered 3 tables. The local news station set up cameras near the podium. Mayor Wilson stepped up first, praising the initiative and cutting a ceremonial ribbon. Applause echoed through the hall. Several veteran families who would be the first residents shared their stories, moving many to tears. Then it was Ryan's turn. He handed Grace to Earl, who beamed with grandfatherly pride, and approached the podium. The microphone squeaked as he adjusted it. "A few months ago," Ryan began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I stood in a pawn shop with my father's medals in my hands and shame in my heart. I was a veteran who couldn't feed his daughter, who felt like he'd failed everyone who believed in him." He paused, meeting Earl's eyes in the crowd. "But that day, I learned something about honor. It's not just about the medals we earn or the battles we fight. It's about how we lift each other up when we fall." The room had gone completely silent. Even Grace seemed to sense the importance of the moment, sitting quietly in Earl's arms. "My father gave his life serving this country. Earl Matthews served alongside him in Vietnam. And now, through Grace House, their legacy lives on." Ryan gestured to the renovated space around them. "This isn't just a building. It's a promise to every veteran who comes through these doors. You are not alone. Your sacrifice matters. Your family matters." Applause burst forth, growing louder as Ryan continued. "None of this would exist without Earl Matthews. He taught me that true strength isn't in fighting battles alone, it's in building something together, in helping others find their way home." Earl started to stand, Grace still in his arms as Ryan called him forward. The applause swelled again. people rising to their feet. But something was wrong. Earl's face had gone ashen, his steps faltering. "Earl?" Ryan rushed forward as the older man swayed. Tommy, the tattooed Marine, lunged forward to catch Grace as Earl's knees buckled. The applause turned to gasps and cries of alarm. Ryan caught Earl before he hit the ground, easing him down gently. "Someone called 911, Ryan shouted, loosening Earl's tie with shaking hands. The mayor was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to emergency services. "Can't," Earl whispered, clutching his chest. "Breathe. Stay with me," Ryan pleaded, gripping Earl's hand. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." The next few minutes blurred into chaos. Paramedics burst through the doors, their equipment clattering on the polished floors. They worked quickly, attaching monitors and speaking in clipped, professional tones. Grace wailed from somewhere in the crowd, her cries cutting through the confusion. "BP's dropping," one paramedic announced, fitting an oxygen mask over Earl's face. "We need to move now." Ryan watched helplessly as they lifted Earl onto a stretcher. The proud soldier who had given him hope now looked small and fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. Someone, maybe Chef Marcus, pressed car keys into Ryan's hand. "Go with him," the chef said. "We'll take care of things here." The ride to Memorial Hospital passed in a daze. Ryan followed the ambulance, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Grace had finally fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted from crying. In the hospital's emergency bay, he could only watch as they wheeled Earl through double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Hours crawled by in the waiting room. Grace dozed fitfully in his arms, while Ryan stared at the institutional green walls, remembering similar vigils during his wife's final days. Veterans from Grace House filtered in and out, bringing coffee and quiet support. Finally, a doctor in wrinkled scrubs approached. "Mr. Cooper? We've stabilized him for now, but his condition is serious. The next 24 hours will be critical." Ryan nodded numbly, following her to Earl's room. The steady beep of monitors filled the air. Earl lay still and pale against white sheets, tubes and wires, seemingly everywhere. "Earl?" Ryan whispered, sinking into the chair beside the bed. Grace stirred in his arms, reaching toward the familiar face. "You can't leave now. We still have work to do." The only response was the rhythmic hum of machines and the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A doctor appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "We're doing all we can." The fluorescent lights hummed steadily in the hospital corridor as Ryan shifted in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside Earl's ICU room. His back ached from nights spent sleeping upright, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. The stack of letters in his lap had grown dog-eared from constant handling messages from families whose lives Earl had touched through Grace House. A nurse wheeled a cart past, her shoes squeaking on the polished floor. "Mr. Cooper, you can go in now. They finished the morning check." Ryan nodded gratefully and gathered his things. Grace dozed in her stroller, clutching the wooden toy Earl had carved for her. Dark circles shadowed Ryan's eyes as he pushed the stroller into the sterile room. Earl lay still among a tangle of tubes and wires, the steady beep of monitors marking time. His usually commanding presence seemed diminished against the stark white sheets, his weathered hands motionless on top of the blanket. "Morning, Earl," Ryan said softly, pulling up a chair. "Brought you today's mail from Grace House." He unfolded the first letter, smoothing its creases. "This one's from Maria Rodriguez. Remember how you helped her family find an apartment last month?" He read aloud, his voice steady, despite the emotion tightening his throat. "Mr. Matthews, because of you, my children have their own beds for the first time. My husband smiles again. We pray for your recovery every night." Grace stirred in her stroller, making soft baby sounds. Ryan reached for his phone and pressed record as she babbled, "Papa, Earl." Her tiny voice echoed in the quiet room. He played it back, holding the phone near Earl's ear. "Hear that? She's been practicing. Everyone misses you at Grace House." Ryan's voice cracked. "The place isn't the same without you telling your terrible jokes." A knock at the door interrupted his words. Sarah Chen from the Veterans Affairs office stood in the doorway, her expression grave. "Ryan, do you have a moment?" His stomach clenched, but he nodded. "Of course. Come in." Sarah perched on the room's other chair, clutching a manila folder. "I wish I had better news. The funding approval is stalled in committee. Without it, we can't officially process the families waiting for placement." Ryan's jaw tightened. "How long?" "Could be weeks. Maybe months." She hesitated. Some board members are suggesting we suspend operations until— No, Ryan's voice was firm. Earl wouldn't want that. These families need us now, not when some committee decides to stamp the right forms. But without proper funding, Earl taught me something. Ryan reached for Grace's hand as she reached up to him. He said faith isn't for when things are easy. It's for moments exactly like this. Sarah's expression softened. You sound just like him. Throughout the day, a steady stream of visitors filled the small room. Veterans from the community center brought flowers and cards. Marcus, their chef, arrived with containers of Earl's favorite beef stew for when he wakes up. Each person shared a story about Earl's kindness, building a tapestry of hope in the sterile space. As evening settled in and the visitors trickled away, Ryan sat alone with Earl in the growing darkness. Grace had finally fallen asleep in her stroller, her peaceful breathing a counterpoint to the mechanical sounds of the medical equipment. He took Earl's hand, careful of the IV line. The skin felt cool and papery beneath his fingers. I know you can hear me, Ryan whispered. Grace House needs you. I need you. If you wake up, I'll finish what we started, whatever it takes. The monitors beeped steadily in response, marking another night of vigil ahead. Ryan pulled out another letter, this one from a young veteran named James, who'd found purpose again helping with Grace House renovations. The paper rustled as he unfolded it, preparing to read through another long night of waiting and hoping. The scent of antiseptic hung in the air as Ryan settled deeper into his chair, determined to keep his promise to Earl, to Grace, to all the families counting on them. Outside the window, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to his unwavering faith in the man who had changed so many lives, including his own. Morning sunlight crept through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Ryan rubbed his tired eyes, his shoulders stiff from another night in the chair beside Earl's bed. The steady beep of monitors had become a familiar rhythm, almost like a lullaby that kept him tethered to hope. A young nurse entered with quiet efficiency, checking Earl's vitals. His numbers are stable, she said softly. Why don't you take a break? Get some fresh air? Ryan shook his head. I need to stay close. His gaze drifted to the small pile of Earl's personal effects on the bedside table, a wallet, a watch, and a worn leather bag the paramedics had brought from Grace House. The nurse smiled kindly. At least let me bring you some coffee. Those belongings aren't going anywhere. After she left, Ryan found himself drawn to the leather bag. He'd been avoiding looking through Earl's things, as if doing so might somehow admit defeat. But something tugged at him now, a whisper of intuition he couldn't ignore. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the bag. Inside, beneath a few personal items, lay a cream-colored envelope. The words, "For when I'm gone," were written in Earl's precise handwriting. Ryan's heart clenched. You knew, he whispered to Earl's still form. You knew something might happen. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, like it carried more than just paper. Ryan glanced at Earl's peaceful face, searching for permission in features that had become as familiar as family. After a long moment, he carefully broke the seal. Inside, he found several documents, legal papers with official letterheads and stamps. As he read, his breath caught. The first document was a trust agreement, establishing the Grace House Foundation with substantial funding. Ryan's name appeared prominently as the designated executor. Oh, Earl, he breathed, his vision blurring. But there was more. Behind the legal papers lay a handwritten letter, the paper soft as if it had been handled many times before being sealed away. Dear Ryan, if you're reading this, I suppose my old heart finally decided to remind me I'm not as young as I used to be. Don't waste time with guilt or grief. I've lived a full life, richer than I deserved. Your father saved my life in Vietnam. He pulled me from that burning truck and never asked for anything in return. That debt has weighed on me for decades. When you walked into my shop with those medals, I knew God had finally shown me how to repay it. The Grace House Foundation is now yours to guide. The trust holds enough funding to keep our dream alive for generations. Your father saved one life that day in Vietnam. Now it's your turn to save others. The medals belong on your wall, son. Let them remind you that the greatest honor isn't in dying for what you believe in, it's in living for it. Take care of our girl. When Grace is old enough, tell her about her grandfathers, all of them. With pride and faith, Earl. Ryan's hands shook as he read the letter a second time, then a third. Tears fell freely onto the paper, and he quickly wiped them away, careful not to smudge the precious words. The morning light seemed brighter now, almost holy in its intensity. He looked at Earl, this man who had planned so carefully, who had seen so clearly what Ryan himself hadn't fully understood. The foundation wasn't just about helping veterans. It was about continuing a chain of grace that had started decades ago in a jungle halfway around the world. The trust documents laid out everything meticulously: funding sources, operational guidelines, succession plans. Earl had thought of everything, ensuring that Grace House would survive and thrive long after he was gone. The amount designated in the trust made Ryan's head spin millions of dollars, all dedicated to supporting veteran families in need. Standing slowly, Ryan placed the letter back in its envelope with reverent care. He rested his hand on Earl's shoulder, feeling the warmth of life still present beneath the hospital gown. "I understand now," he said softly. "What you did at the pawn shop. It wasn't just about helping Grace and me. You were passing on the torch my father lit. I won't let either of you down." The morning sun had fully risen now, its rays streaming through the window. Ryan tucked the envelope securely in his jacket pocket, its weight against his chest feeling like a shield of purpose. He stepped toward the door, each movement filled with new resolve. In the doorway, he paused for one last look at Earl. The morning light bathed the room in gold, transforming the sterile hospital space into something almost sacred. The envelope pressed against his heart like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Ryan stood in the main hall of Grace House, surrounded by a circle of worried faces. Veterans young and old, their families and local volunteers had gathered at his urgent call. The morning light filtered through the newly cleaned windows, highlighting the fresh paint and repaired walls all Earl's vision brought to life. "I know things look rough right now," Ryan began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. But Earl Matthews didn't build this place for it to close after one setback. He held Grace close to his chest, drawing strength from her peaceful weight. "We're soldiers. We adapt and overcome." Tom, a Vietnam-era Marine with silver hair, stepped forward. "What do you need us to do, son?" Ryan pulled out a notepad. "First, we organize. Sarah, you mentioned your church group does bake sales?" A woman in her 60s nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect. Pete, you still make those wooden toys in your workshop?" The retired carpenter smiled, patting his tool belt. Within an hour, they had a plan. The community room transformed into command central, with veterans applying military precision to civilian challenges. They divided into teams, each taking on different aspects of fundraising. The first bake sale exceeded expectations. Sarah's group set up tables outside the local grocery store, the aroma of fresh cookies and bread drawing curious shoppers. Grace, strapped to Ryan's chest in her baby carrier, became their secret weapon. Her bright smiles and grabby hands made even the most hurried passers-by stop and listen to their story. "This little one," Ryan would say, touching Grace's cheek. "She's why we named it Grace House. Because sometimes grace comes when you least expect it, just like Earl showed us." Pete and his woodworking buddies organized an art exhibition in the center's gymnasium. Display tables showcased handcrafted toys, intricate wooden boxes, and carved military insignias. Each piece came with a story, the veteran who made it, their service history, their connection to Grace House. A local reporter, Kate Chen, arrived one afternoon while Ryan was fixing a leaky faucet. She watched as Grace toddled between veterans' legs, receiving high fives and gentle pats from everyone she passed. "She's like a tiny commanding officer," Kate observed, scribbling notes. "Everyone lights up when she comes around." Ryan wiped his hands on his jeans. "They're all her family now. That's what Earl wanted, a place where no veteran feels alone." The story ran the next day. Grace Under Pressure, How a Baby Girl and Her Father United Veterans to Save Their Home. The article detailed Earl's collapse, Ryan's determination, and the community's response. Photos showed Grace being cradled by various veterans, her face bright with unguarded joy. Donations began trickling in, then flowing. A local business matched the bake sale funds. A veteran-owned construction company offered free repairs. Children emptied piggy banks. Elderly veterans sent in crumpled dollar bills with notes saying, "For Earl." Ryan kept track of every cent, every name. Each evening, after Grace was asleep, he'd drive to the hospital and sit beside Earl's bed, sharing the day's victories and challenges. The Wilson twins had their art display today, he said one night, adjusting Earl's blanket. "Remember how you said they just needed a purpose? Well, they sold every piece." He pulled out his phone, showing Earl pictures of the event. "And Grace, she's got everyone wrapped around her finger, just like you said she would." The monitors beeped steadily, Earl's chest rising and falling in mechanical rhythm. Ryan continued his update, describing how the volunteer roster had doubled, how 3 homeless veterans had found housing through their new outreach program. "We're doing it, Earl," Ryan said softly. "Grace House is growing stronger every day. Just like you planned." He placed a fresh photo on Earl's bedside table, Grace, surrounded by smiling veterans, the Grace House sign proudly displayed behind them. "She asks about her Papa Earl every day. The other vets tell her stories about you, about Dad, about all the heroes who brought us here." The night shift nurse appeared in the doorway, her presence a gentle reminder that visiting hours were ending. Ryan stood, squeezing Earl's hand one last time. "Same time tomorrow," he promised. "We'll keep the light on for you at Grace House, just like you always did for us." As Ryan walked through the quiet hospital corridors, his phone buzzed with messages from volunteers. Tomorrow's schedule, new donations, more stories of lives being changed. Grace House wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, becoming everything Earl had dreamed it could be. In the parking lot, Ryan paused to look up at Earl's window. The warm glow of the room light a beacon in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, he could rest knowing they were honoring Earl's legacy, one act of grace at a time. He climbed into his truck, the folder of donation records tucked safely beside him. Another day of keeping promises, of building bridges between broken souls, of turning pain into purpose, just as Earl had taught him, just as Grace reminded them all was possible. The antiseptic smell of the hospital had become as familiar to Ryan as Grace's baby powder. He trudged down the corridor, his boots squeaking against the freshly mopped floor, carrying a stack of Grace House photos to share with Earl, even if the old man couldn't respond. But today felt different. The morning nurse, Sandra, rushed toward him with a broad smile that made his heart skip. "He's awake!" she exclaimed. "Been asking for you since dawn." Ryan froze, the photo album nearly slipping from his trembling hands. After weeks of silence, of one-sided conversations and desperate prayers, it seemed impossible. He quickened his pace, torn between running and maintaining his composure. Outside Earl's room, he paused to catch his breath. Through the window, he could see Earl propped up slightly on pillows, looking frail but alert. The morning sun cast a gentle glow across his weathered face, highlighting the deep lines etched by years of worry and loss. Ryan entered quietly, his throat tight with emotion. Earl's eyes, though tired, sparkled with their old warmth. "There you are, son," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "Earl." Ryan started, but words failed him. A familiar smirk crossed Earl's pale face. "Took you long enough to fix the place up," he quipped weakly, gesturing at the photo album in Ryan's hands. Ryan laughed through sudden tears, dropping into the chair beside the bed. "Well, some of us actually follow building codes," he replied, falling easily into their old pattern of gentle teasing. Earl's attempt at a chuckle turned into a small cough, but his eyes remained bright. "Show me," he whispered, pointing at the album. "Show me what you've done with my mess." Ryan opened the album across Earl's lap, careful not to disturb the IV lines. The first photo showed the main hall transformed walls, freshly painted in warm earth tones, new lighting fixtures casting a welcoming glow. Veterans and their families filled the space, sharing a community dinner. "Remember how dark it was?" Ryan said, pointing to the before photo beside it. "The electrician, you remember Jim from the center? He donated all the fixtures. Said it was the least he could do after you helped his son through rehab last year." Earl traced the images with a trembling finger. "The tables," he murmured. "All handmade," Ryan confirmed. "The woodworking group wanted to contribute. They've been meeting twice a week now, teaching younger vets the trade." Page after page, Ryan shared the revival of Grace House. The old kitchen now gleamed with donated appliances and hosted cooking classes. The shabby courtyard had become a thriving garden where children played while their parents attended support groups. Veterans of different eras worked side by side, finding purpose in helping others. When they reached the photos of the newly opened children's playroom, Earl's eyes welled up. "Michael," he whispered, touching a bright mural of soldiers returning home to their families. Michael would have loved this. Ryan squeezed Earl's hand gently. He does love it. His dream is helping people heal just like he wanted. Earl didn't try to hide the tears now rolling down his cheeks. All those years hiding in that pawn shop, thinking I was honoring him by punishing myself. He shook his head slowly. But this is what he meant about service. Not just surviving war, but helping others truly live again. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the morning sun warm them. Earl's gaze drifted to the window, then back to Ryan. "Grace?" he asked hopefully. "Is she?" "She's right outside with the nurse." Ryan smiled. "Been asking for Papa Earl every day. Would you like to see her?" Earl nodded, trying to sit up straighter. Ryan stepped into the hallway and returned with Grace toddling beside him, her small hand clutching his finger. She wore a tiny flower dress Earl had bought her weeks ago, her dark curls bouncing with each step. At the sight of Earl, Grace's face lit up with pure joy. "Papa!" she exclaimed, reaching toward the bed. Ryan lifted her carefully, setting her on the edge of Earl's bed. Earl's eyes shone as she crawled closer, completely unafraid of the tubes and machines. "Hello, precious girl," Earl whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Grace patted his face with her tiny hands, babbling happily. "Your name means mercy," he continued softly. "And you've brought plenty to me." Ryan watched them together, his own vision blurring. In that moment, he saw 3 generations of service and sacrifice, love and redemption, all bound together by a baby's innocent trust and an old soldier's renewed heart. Grace settled against Earl's chest, content as he stroked her curls with shaking fingers. The morning sun painted them in gentle gold, grandfather and grandchild, their bond transcending blood and time. In the peaceful quiet, broken only by Grace's happy murmurs, Ryan saw the true meaning of family, not just those we're born to, but those we choose to love and serve. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Grace House when Ryan received the call. Earl had slipped away quietly in his sleep, just as dawn broke over the horizon. The news settled into Ryan's chest like a heavy stone, even though they'd all known this day was coming. Word spread quickly through the small town. By afternoon, flowers and handwritten notes appeared at Grace House's entrance. Veterans, young and old, stood in silent tribute, some with tears streaming down weathered faces, others offering crisp salutes to honor the man who had given them back their dignity. 3 days later, the main hall of Grace House transformed for Earl's memorial service. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly with townspeople, veterans, and families whose lives Earl had touched. American flags lined the walls, and at the front, a simple wooden podium stood beside a large portrait of Earl in his Vietnam uniform, young, proud, and full of the same quiet strength he'd carried all his life. Grace sat on Ryan's lap in the front row, playing with the ribbons on her dress, too young to understand why everyone spoke in whispers. Her dark curls reminded Ryan so much of Emily, and he held her closer, grateful for the warmth of her small body against his chest. The ceremony began with taps played by a veteran bugler. The mournful notes floated through the hall, stirring memories in every heart. Ryan watched as elderly veterans straightened their backs, muscle memory from countless farewells to fallen brothers taking over. When it was time for the eulogy, Ryan passed Grace to Mrs. Martinez, a volunteer who had become like family. His boots echoed against the wooden floor as he approached the podium. Behind him, in a newly installed glass case, his father's medals gleamed, the same medals that had started this incredible journey. Ryan cleared his throat, his hand steady on the podium as he looked out at the gathered faces. "Earl Matthews," he began, his voice strong and clear, "wasn't just a wealthy man who gave away his fortune. He wasn't just a decorated veteran or a humble pawn shop owner. Earl was a father to the fatherless, a friend to the forgotten, and a light in the darkness for so many of us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I first met Earl on the hardest night of my life. I was a single dad with an empty bottle and an hungry baby. I went to his shop to sell the only thing of value I had left, my father's war medals." Ryan's voice caught slightly. "But Earl didn't just give me money that night. He gave me back my dignity. He showed me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when we need it most." The audience sat in respectful silence as Ryan continued. "Later, I learned that Earl had served with my father in Vietnam. that my father had saved his life. And in return, decades later, Earl saved mine and my daughter's. He gestured to the medals in their case. These medals represent a chain of service and sacrifice that spans generations. They remind us that no soldier fights alone, and no veteran should have to face their battles alone either. Veterans in the audience nodded, some wiping away tears. Ryan spoke about Earl's vision for Grace House, about his quiet strength and unfailing kindness. He told them about Earl's own loss, his son Michael in Afghanistan, and how that pain had driven him to help others instead of becoming bitter. Earl taught me that faith isn't just about believing in better days, Ryan said, his voice growing stronger. It's about creating them. It's about taking our wounds and turning them into wisdom, our loss into love. The sunlight shifted through the windows, catching the medals in their case. For a moment, the entire wall seemed to glow with golden light. Several veterans gasped softly at the timing, as if nature itself was offering a final salute. Earl never wanted recognition, Ryan continued. He gave away millions anonymously, helped countless veterans rebuild their lives, and asked for nothing in return. But today, we recognize him. Not because he would have wanted it, but because his example shows us what one life, lived with purpose and compassion, can achieve. As Ryan concluded his eulogy, a gentle breeze stirred through an open window, setting off the wind chime Earl had hung outside just weeks before. Its clear, peaceful notes rang through the quiet hall. Ryan looked up, a small smile touching his lips. "He's home now," he said softly. "With Michael, with my father, with all the brothers in arms who went before." The wind chime continued its gentle song, a melody of remembrance and peace. The veterans rose as one, offering a final salute. In the front row, Grace reached toward the sound of the chimes, her innocent wonder a reminder that life continues, that hope endures, that love never truly dies, but lives on in the lives we touch and the good we leave behind. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, warming the medals in their case, while outside, the wind chime played its sweet, simple song of farewell. Note: stopped here, as we've covered all the required elements from the instructions, the memorial service, the medals in the glass case, Ryan's heartfelt eulogy about fathers and faith, and the final moment with the wind chime. The autumn breeze carried the rich, comforting scent of fresh-baked bread through the bright halls of Grace House, mingling with the aroma of cinnamon and apple pie from the kitchen. 6 months had passed since Earl's peaceful passing in his sleep, but his spirit lived on in every corner of the sprawling building. The once abandoned structure, formerly a crumbling veterans facility that had seen better days now, hummed with vibrant life and renewed purpose. Its freshly painted walls echoed with the musical laughter of children playing and the deep, resonant voices of veterans sharing war stories and memories over steaming cups of coffee in the common room. Ryan Cooper stood in the wide doorway of the main dining hall, his shoulder leaning against the polished wooden frame as he watched the heartwarming scene unfold before him. Dozens of families had gathered for the weekly community dinner, a tradition Earl had started in the early days. A young veteran with a sleek prosthetic leg knelt beside his 6-year-old daughter at one of the round tables, patiently teaching her how to fold paper airplanes from napkins, his eyes bright with joy. At the serving counter, another former soldier rolled up his sleeves and helped dish out heaping plates of homemade lasagna, garlic bread, and fresh salad to the growing line of grateful families. The scene before him, full of hope, healing, and genuine connection, would have brought tears of pure joy to Earl's weathered eyes. "Mr. Cooper?" A hesitant, almost whispered voice drew his attention away from the bustling dining room. A woman in her 30s stood nearby in the hallway, nervously clutching her worn leather purse with both hands. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes, though clean, showed signs of wear. "I heard about this place from someone at the VA office. My husband. He's been having a really hard time since coming home from his deployment." Ryan's expression immediately softened with understanding and compassion. He'd had this exact conversation many times now with struggling military families, but it never got any easier to hear the pain in their voices. Each story reminded him of his own desperate nights not so long ago. "Of course. Come into my office," he said gently, gesturing down the hall. "Let's sit down and talk about how we can help your family." His office, which had once served as Earl's temporary workspace during the renovation months, now bore the thoughtful touches of both men's personalities and histories. Earl's sturdy old wooden desk, the same one from his pawn shop, sat positioned beneath a large window that overlooked the peaceful courtyard garden. Framed photographs of both their fathers in crisp military uniforms hung side by side on the wall behind the desk, their faces showing the same quiet dignity and strength that had defined both men. Between the photographs, a new brass plaque gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. In memory of Earl Matthews and Captain Thomas Cooper, men of valor, fathers of grace. As Ryan settled into the comfortable leather chair behind the desk and began pulling out intake forms, 3-year-old Grace suddenly burst through the office door like a tiny whirlwind. Her dark curls bounced with each enthusiastic step, and her face glowed with excitement. "Daddy, Daddy, look what I made in art time!" She thrust forward a colorful crayon drawing of what appeared to be their family stick figures of varying sizes standing in front of a big house, including one figure with bright yellow wings that she always called Angel Earl. "It's absolutely beautiful, sweetheart." Ryan smiled warmly, setting down his papers and lifting his daughter onto his lap. Her small weight against his chest always brought him instant comfort. He turned to the nervous woman across from his desk. "This is my daughter Grace. The house is named after her. She's our inspiration for everything we do here." The woman's tense shoulders relaxed slightly as Grace turned in her father's arms and waved enthusiastically with her whole hand. "Hi there! Do you want to color pictures with me? I have lots of crayons!" "Maybe later, honey," Ryan said softly, smoothing down Grace's unruly curls. "Why don't you go help Miss Sarah in the kitchen? I heard she's making chocolate chip cookies for after dinner." Grace's eyes lit up at the mention of cookies, and she scrambled down from Ryan's lap. "Okay, bye, lady," she called cheerfully as she skipped out of the office, her small feet pattering down the hallway. After Grace disappeared around the corner, Ryan spent the next hour carefully listening to the woman's heartbreaking story. Her husband had returned from a difficult deployment in Afghanistan 3 months ago and couldn't seem to hold down any job for more than a week. The nightmares kept him awake, and the crowds at work made him panic. They were now facing eviction from their small apartment, and their savings had dwindled to almost nothing. It was a painfully familiar tale, one that had once been his own desperate reality not so very long ago. "We have a temporary apartment available upstairs in our family wing," Ryan explained gently, pulling out some simple forms and a pen. "It's fully furnished and includes all utilities. And when your husband is ready, no pressure at all, we'll help him find meaningful work that understands his situation. The most important thing for you to know is this: you're not alone anymore. We're family here." Later that evening, after the halls had gradually quieted and the last volunteer had said goodnight and headed home, Ryan carried a sleepy Grace up the carpeted stairs to their cozy apartment above Grace House. The space was simple but undeniably warm, filled with framed photographs of happy moments, Grace's colorful artwork taped to the refrigerator, and Earl's comfortable old furniture that he'd insisted they keep. Earl had been adamant that they live on site, always saying with a gentle smile that a home needs a loving family at its heart to truly thrive. In Grace's cheerful room, the soft glow of her nightlight cast dancing shadows on the pale pink walls that Earl had helped Ryan paint the previous spring. Ryan gently laid his daughter in her toddler bed converted from the crib she'd outgrown just months before, and tucked her favorite stuffed elephant securely under her small arm. Above the bed, mounted with careful precision on the wall, his father's medals hung in their beautifully polished frame, meticulously restored by Earl's expert hands before his peaceful passing. The medals caught the last golden rays of sunset streaming through the lace-curtained window, their brass and silver surfaces glowing like gentle halos in the fading light. Ryan stood quietly for a moment, remembering that desperate, cold night when he'd carried them with trembling hands to Earl's pawn shop, thinking in his desperation that he was selling away his father's honor and legacy forever. Instead, that single act of desperation had set in motion an incredible chain of events that had saved not just Grace, but countless other struggling families who now called Grace House their sanctuary. Brushing back Grace's soft curls with tender fingers, Ryan leaned down close to her ear and whispered the same words he said every night. "You'll never go hungry again, sweetheart. Grandpa's medals will always protect you, and Angel Earl is watching over us both." The medals gleamed softly in response to his words, their warm light seeming to embrace both father and daughter in a protective glow, eternal symbols of grace, redemption, sacrifice, and the kind of love that transcends generations. Through the open window came the gentle sound of wind chimes, Earl's favorites that still hung from the old oak tree in the courtyard. their soft, melodic tinkling a constant reminder that some bonds never break, and that true love, like true sacrifice, lives on forever in the hearts it touches and transforms. Ryan settled into the comfortable rocking chair beside Grace's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as she slept peacefully. In the quiet moment, surrounded by the soft sounds of evening, he could almost hear Earl's warm voice echoing in his memory. "Your father's bravery fed me once. His son's courage fed my soul." The profound words echoed in his heart as the last golden light of day painted the room in beautiful shades of amber and rose. The metals above, catching and holding the fading light like captured stars, a lasting testament to the power of grace, the strength found in unexpected connections, and the healing that comes when broken people choose to help other broken people find their way home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ryan Cooper, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.